My name is Mrs. Frances Aldgate, née Pennington. I am 31 years old, married to a solicitor in Shropshire, and I am the elder sister of Miss Louisa Pennington, who is, as of the first Saturday of June, 1885, no longer Miss Louisa Pennington, but rather the Duchess of Hartwell. I want to tell you what happened at the Cavendish Assembly on the evening of the 14th of April, because I was standing 12 feet away when it happened, and because I have been telling the story since, and I find that my version, which contains the actual details, is considerably more accurate than the one that has been circulating. Let me tell you about Louisa first. She is 22. She is the second daughter of a Shropshire land agent, my father, who is a careful and decent man and who has, throughout our upbringing, been clear about the distinction between what we could expect and what we could not. We were educated. We were dressed properly. We were brought to Bath for one season each, and then the season ended, and we returned to Shropshire, and that was understood to be the shape of things. Louisa is not fashionable. She is not witty in the drawing-room way. She has a face that people tend to describe, if they describe it at all, as pleasant, by which they mean that it does not call attention to itself. She wears what is practical. She thinks before she speaks, which in certain rooms produces a silence that is mistaken for slowness. She is, in my professional assessment as her sister of 22 years, one of the most precise and trustworthy thinkers I have ever encountered, and also the last person anyone in a ballroom is likely to notice first. The Cavendish Assembly in April was the third evening of the Bath Spring Gathering. I had accompanied Louisa as a married chaperone, a function my husband good-naturedly had released me for. The assembly was full. The rooms were warm. The Hartwell party had arrived at 8, and by 8:15 the Duke of Hartwell was the topic of approximately half conversations happening in the room simultaneously. I am going to tell you what he looked like, because it is relevant context. He is tall, genuinely tall, not in the social approximation of the word, dark-haired, composed, with the specific quality of stillness that belongs to men who are accustomed to having rooms arrange themselves around them. He is 34. He had been widowed 2 years prior. His wife died of fever, which everyone knew, and his return to society was, in the way of these things, an event in itself. He was accompanied by Lord Prentiss, who is his closest friend, and by the usual assortment of interested parties, 3 families with daughters in white and one with a daughter in pale green. They positioned themselves with a systematic intention that was, if you were watching, fairly transparent. Louisa was not in white or pale green. She was in a dark blue that I had always thought suited her, and that the rooms would have categorized, if they noticed at all, as practical. She was standing at the edge of the room near the windows, speaking with Mrs. Hartley, who is a widow of 62, and who had known our mother, and who is, if you are looking for the honest part of any room, usually where you want to stand, I was on the other side of the room. I was watching, because I always watch. It is a habit I have had since childhood, and which my husband refers to as my editorial faculty. At approximately 9 o'clock the dancing began. The Duke of Hartwell danced the first set with Miss Clara Vane, the eldest daughter of Sir Gerald Vane, which was the expected outcome, and was received by the room as a confirmation of something. He danced the second set with Miss Aldrich, which was read as a deliberate equity gesture. He declined a third invitation politely, and I watched him take a glass of wine and stand with Lord Prentiss in a mild conversation that was clearly being conducted at half attention. He was looking at the room, not in the way that people look at rooms when they are seeking something specific, not with that particular focused direction. He was looking at the room in the way that suggests a man is very good at seeing things that are not calling attention to themselves. At 9:23, I am precise because I had checked my watch a few minutes prior, a habit from my years of managing our father's appointment correspondence. The Duke set down his glass, said something brief to Lord Prentiss, and walked across the room, not toward the Vane sisters, not toward any of the white dresses. He walked, at a pace that was unhurried and direct, toward the windows, and when he reached them he stopped beside Mrs. Hartley, who received him with the composure of a woman who has survived many things, and beside my sister Louisa, who looked at him with the expression I have seen on her face when she is determining whether a piece of information is as reliable as it appears. He addressed her first. "Not Mrs. Hartley, my sister," he said, and I was close enough by this point to hear it clearly. "Miss Pennington, I was told you have read Marsden's Survey of County Records, and that you found a significant error in the secondary appendix." Louisa said, and I will record this as I heard it, without editorial correction, "It was not significant. It was a transcription error in the table of enclosure dates for the eastern parishes. The primary source gives 1847. The appendix shows 1844. It changes the analysis of the Lethwaite dispute materially. The Duke said, "By how much?" Louisa said, 8 years. The dispute predates the consolidation, which means the Lethwaite interpretation in Chapter 4 is built on an incorrect premise. The rest of the chapter is sound. There was a brief pause in which the Duke of Hartwell looked at my sister with an expression I can only describe as the expression of a man who has been in a room for 2 hours and has finally found what he came for. He said, "Will you walk with me to the supper room? I want to understand the enclosure dates correctly." Louisa said, "Yes." They walked across the room together. The room watched this. The room had been watching, I think, from the moment he stood and walked toward the windows, because the Duke of Hartwell crossing a room is an event. But the direction he went, and who he stopped beside, and the specific quality of his attention when he spoke to her, that was the thing the room had not arranged itself to expect, and the room showed it. I watched people watch them leave. Lord Prentiss appeared beside me approximately 4 minutes after this, which suggests he had been watching approximately as carefully as I had. He said, with the dry satisfaction of a man who was not surprised, "She found the error in the appendix?" I said, 8 years. He said, "He has been looking for someone who found that error for 4 months. He was beginning to think no one had read the appendix." I said, "My sister reads everything." Lord Prentiss said, "Yes, he has gathered that." They were in the supper room for 40 minutes. I know because I waited. When they came back into the assembly rooms, they were not talking about enclosure dates, or perhaps they were, and enclosure dates had become the container for something else entirely. I cannot say with certainty. What I can say is that Louisa had the particular quality she has when a piece of information has proved out to be exactly as reliable as she suspected, and that the Duke was walking beside her with the full, unhurried attention of a man who had no interest in being anywhere else. He called in Shropshire the following month. He came twice. The second time he came, Louisa walked with him in the garden for an hour and came back in with her hair slightly wind-disturbed, and her expression settled in the manner of someone who has made a thorough assessment and arrived at a conclusion she is satisfied with. My father, who had been watching from the study window, said only, "Well," I said, "Yes." He called a third time in May and spoke with my father and with Louisa and then with my father again. There was a very brief correspondence, and then there was no more correspondence of that kind, because everything had been agreed to. At the engagement announcement, a number of people said, with the particular warmth people apply to surprises they find charming in retrospect, "What a remarkable story, the Duke of Hartwell walking across the Cavendish Assembly to the woman standing at the window. How romantic, how unexpected." I want to say, for the record, that it was not unexpected from where I was standing. A man who can see a room clearly will eventually walk toward the part of it that is worth walking toward. The Vane daughters were visible and lovely and positioned with considerable intentionality. Louisa was standing beside a 62-year-old widow discussing the parish consolidation records of Shropshire. The Duke of Hartwell walked toward the window. That is the story. That is all of it. Some things are only remarkable if you weren't paying attention. The rest of us were not surprised at all.